Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I am here with Sam Schutte. Sam, very excited to have you on.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here.
So Sam, you are an expert in process improvement and custom software development, where you run a team from your base in Ohio. Your clients include CBRE, Sunstar, Ball, and several other billion-dollar organizations that some people might be familiar with, others might not. But you're a real expert in the area that you work in. And I'd love for you to kind of just tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're really doing. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you do.
Sure, yeah. So Unstoppable Software is my company. And as you mentioned, we're a software development firm. And I think our sweet spot is working with companies that want to do strategic software development, want software development and software product development to be a key part of their strategy. And specifically working with companies sort of in the verticals of industrial manufacturing, engineered products, sort of that engineering and architecture space. And basically, what I work with them as a consultant, as an individual, my role is to help guide them through that process, because often our clients don't have any real strong background in software development. It's not something that they've really focused on as a core competency, even if they're a very large company. So I guide them through that process, and then sort of because of the nature of the work that we do, we also have to sort of provide the implementation services, right? And so then we have a team of developers that we kind of bring to bear to build out their software product.
Right. And then tell us like how you got into it, because your story was an interesting one. Like I remember actually, you have this on your website. You talk about, leaving, was it university or college, like kind of fresh out, you posted your resume, and then same day or a few hours later, you got a call from a recruiter. And then later that day, you already kind of had your first gig. But talk us through a little bit like how you got to where you are today in terms of the different types of places that you worked before you actually went out on your own and started your own consulting business.
Yeah. So as you said, I got my computer science degree from University of Pittsburgh. I started out actually in medical records. So we have done a lot of healthcare software in the past as well because of that. But, worked in large IT departments as well as for a lot of different startups. And I think seeing the difference between the way startups operate that are really cranking out product, venture capital backed startups versus IT departments that often are much, more slower moving and they have all different constraints and stuff. That was a key insight. But basically I did that for a number of years. And then, it was kind of serendipity that I was finishing up a contract. I started the company about 12 years ago. So this was January of 2008. And a friend of mine had gotten promoted to a vice president position. And I was finishing up a contract that was just winding down. And he said, well, why don't you come work for me? And this is at a large $60 billion company. And I said, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it on my own as a consultant. Now, at the time, my wife was pregnant. I had my house on the market. I was going to night school. And I was like, yeah, sure. Perfect time to start a company. Right. So I think my wife thought I was a little crazy. But, that 6-month contract with working for that gentleman who's a vice president, over time, I grew that account. So I kind of learned how to do account sales to grow, from an initial footprint to the point that, we had at one time 10 people full-time within that organization working on projects. And we still work with them. 12 years later, a lot of business with them. And I think that was kind of our initial foray into working with industrial manufacturing, industrial companies. And that's kind of been a recurrent theme. So that's something we sort of have developed a center of excellence around, is working with that type of company. And we kind of know the problems they have and the challenges they have. So.
Got it. And then talk us through kind of like the client or the next client beyond that. That was someone who kind of wanted to bring you in-house. You said, no, let me do it as a consultant. How did you then kind of take and leverage that first experience into actually starting your own consulting business and kind of getting your first client or two?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for a while, it's like and I think a lot of consulting companies face this problem where you get one major client and they can just dominate you. And yes, maybe you're doing millions in revenue, but it's all with them. And I know firms that's worked out very badly for, But so for a while, it became my priority. Like, I've got to diversify. I don't care who it is, how it is. I'm trying to remember that far back. You're talking about 10 years ago now. But I think basically it was probably through word of mouth and people I knew at that point, getting into probably our second, I had a couple companies that our big companies sort of referred us into, right? So we did a little work with like US Steel because they had that relationship and got me in. And then I think it was also just some other people we knew that brought us into some medical records projects and stuff like that. So again, that healthcare space. So starting out, I mean, just like anybody, trying to do a lot of networking, people that was what kind of allowed me to do that initial diversification. And it was also hiring salespeople that had a good Rolodesk or Rolodex.
You hired salespeople.
Correct. Yeah. So I had a couple of salespeople work for me, and at one point hired a pretty experienced gentleman who had some great connections at some very large companies, and that got us into them.
But what did that look like? Because I think a lot of people, would be interested in exploring that idea, right? So many consultants are very good at what they do. They have the expertise. They can provide the value for the client. They're not necessarily that excited about the idea of going out and selling themselves and doing the marketing. There's a lot of people who would love just to find a salesperson or someone to kind of take that off their back and implement it. May you just explain to us, what did that look like for you, the person or the people that you were bringing on at that time? And then may talk about how that compares to today, if there's, if they're no longer around. So just kind of walk us through, how did you go about finding those people, and what did that experience look like for you?
No, that's a great question. I mean, so it's really hard. And it's funny because, my dad is sort of came up through the IT industry. So he's always been a role model of mine. And he said, hiring salespeople is hard because they're basically professional liars, the good ones, right? And, no offense to salespeople and myself included. But so I found it to be very difficult to find the right person, probably harder than hiring software developers. I kind of tried. First, I tried going for someone that was super experienced and very expensive, but someone like that is really hard to keep long term. Again, did get us into some really good opportunities, but it didn't last long because it's kind of, always on to the next bigger opportunity. So then I tried the other extreme end of someone who was, fresh out of school, no experience whatsoever at any kind of sales. And my idea was I could train them up. And I think, that was a different set of results that wasn't great either, because it was just, it's no small thing to create a sort of sales management and sales training program from scratch, right? That's probably even harder, becoming a salesperson. So what I kind of found is that, you can't necessarily outsource that until you really have it down pat. And I think even then, because of the nature of what we do, which is sort of, very custom, very complex and far reaching in an organization's, process and business, it has to be something that I'm pretty intimately involved in. And so where we're at now is I basically kind of manage all those sales and make all those sales happen. And I think what you kind of learn though, and most people learn, is there's subdivisions of that, right? Because there's people like, can someone do lead generation, but maybe they're not the ones doing the calls, right? And so I think that's probably our next step, is trying to figure out those things that can be done well by someone else.
I think it's a really good point. Like, we see this a lot with consultants that either reach out or we have conversations with, or they're, coming to our programs, is oftentimes wanting to try and kind of outsource or, get someone else to handle the marketing or the sales aspects. But as you said, if you don't have some of the fundamentals and kind of foundational elements in place, it's really hard to get the most out of that. And that's why I often, recommend, and Sam, because we work together, in terms of, getting very clear on your ideal client and your messaging and all these other things first, but also, going out and having those initial conversations with buyers, whether or not they buy right away, teaches you a lot, right? And that's information that you can then use to strengthen the sales process, to strengthen your messaging and marketing materials and all of that. So what we tend to see, I mean, this is just kind of putting out there, my observation is that most people have greater success bringing on sales people or getting support in those areas once they've built a good foundation first in their business, where they've had an opportunity to test some things, to work through refining their own messaging, their ideal clients. And then you can be very, or at least more strategic in terms of where you're putting people in or what resources, you're kind of putting together, rather than just trying to take this whole chunk from the get-go and put it onto someone else, because then they have a whole big learning curve that it takes for them to get up to where you want. And most entrepreneurs, most consultants don't have the patience for that, right? It's, if we give something to an agency, we expect that we're going to see results right away, but they need time to really, figure out what's going to work and what doesn't. So doing it yourself often in the early stages is probably the best thing, because you're going to get that feedback. Let's talk about your industry to a degree. Like, I think we're talking about marketing here and business development and sales. A big part of that, right, has to do with your messaging, your specialization, your focus. And you're in a marketplace, Sam, where, when people hear the words custom software, like the first thing that often comes to their mind is cheap offshore development companies, right? And that's something that I think anyone in your area comes up against. So how do you deal with that? What have been your steps to position so that there's enough differentiation between someone who might just think, like your ideal clients might just think, why don't we just go offshore and find some cheap option to do this? How do you get people to see that that might not be the best idea for them?
That's a good question. And I think the thing is understanding sort of like the different stratification within our, sort of narrow industry here of software development, right? It's tempting, I think, and most folks outside of it probably put some big label on it that it's all just, programming consulting or something, right? But there's, so there's different people that are our clients and then others that are not our clients, right?
What do you mean by that? So dig in a bit more to that.
So for instance, if you look at companies that claim to be software consulting companies, 95% of those are just staff augmentation companies that it's just sort of a shell game with, W-2 versus.
And so just to clarify for everyone, Sam, so you mean that they essentially go out, they find contractors, right, resources, people to fulfill on projects?
Essentially just recruiters, yeah. So, there's a lot of companies that based on a Google search, you might think they do exactly what we do, but really, what they're doing is like, the Krogers of the world or somebody like that says, hey, I need 20 developers for 6 months. I'm going to hire 10 of them. Just go find some bodies. And so I call those body shops, right? But they're not involved in the process of development. They don't really that company doesn't have their own, bench of developers or anything like that. They're just trying to fill a gap. And there's a need for that because obviously a company like Kroger or whoever, they don't want to be doing the recruiting. So that's the problem they're solving, right? So we're not in the recruiting business, and we've never had a client hire a developer away from us. They're not allowed to, actually. And, our developers that work for us have been here a very long time, 10 years, And so what we go for, though, in the sort of sector of the market we want to work with is when we hear people start talking about how they're looking for a partner, development partner, right? And what that means is a company like ours that can come in and kind of bolt on to their existing organization and basically amplify their ability to do stuff they couldn't do before, right? Yeah. And so, for instance, one of our customers, and we work with big firms, small firms. One of our customers, they've got about 15 employees. They manufacture optical lenses, optical products of all kinds of complexity. Well, when they're looking at needing to build out systems for their process, are they going to go figure out how to hire a developer? What do you do about source code? All these other, how do you manage them? What kind of process? What does agile mean? It's a complicated high risk game, right? Because it's expensive. Or are they going to go look for a partner such as ourselves that we can attach and kind of become a key part of their strategy, both to be more competitive out there, to save money and time and everything, and also just reduce the risk of something going wrong. Us putting that skin in the game and that ownership of the project is probably the easiest way to see it versus if I just say, yeah, here's a developer, good luck. Let me know how it goes in 6 months. Here's your hourly rate.
So what's really, I guess, Ben, what I'm hearing you say is you've put in the time to really think through the difference between what you're providing and what others are providing. And it's great not to hear you just say, oh, we're better, or, we focus on higher levels of service, or all these kind of like buzzwords or just, meaningless words that everyone says, and there's no differentiation because everyone's saying the exact same thing. And so for everyone listening to this or kind of, viewing, I would say, think about deeply, like, what are you doing right now to really hit on the difference between you and others in the marketplace, and go beyond the buzzwords, go beyond kind of the surface level points of difference that maybe everyone says on their website, and really think about how does that difference play out in the mind of your ideal client? How do you take that and make sure that you're communicating it in your messaging? And so for you, Sam, I guess that's the next question I have for you is, how have you taken that now understanding and knowledge of the difference? So you've identified, okay, a buying criteria for us is when someone's not just looking for developers, they're specifically looking for partner, right? That's a kind of a very interesting keyword that you can kind of seek to or focus on and identify. What have you then done with that? What have been some of the best practices that you've implemented now, knowing that point of difference? How have you then used that to your benefit in your marketing or in conversations or messaging or in anything else? What have you kind of done with that knowledge now?
It's a good question. I think, from a marketing standpoint, we try to talk more about sort of strategic questions and not skill questions, maybe. I mean, we do a little bit of both. I think if you were trying to sell somebody on the idea that you've got the best developer in the world and that they should hire them to come work for them as an employee, right? And you get a commission on that, maybe what you're going to talk about is a certain skill that developers so great at, like, oh, we're the master at, Angular or something like that.
Right.
Whereas I think what I try to talk about more is like, how can we help you develop intellectual property? What can intellectual property do for your business? And answer questions like, should I patent things? Because that's what people ask me. They don't ask me about, should we be writing software in X or Y? Right.
Right.
And, then I think it also affects the way we develop our products and services and our sort of productized services, which you and I have worked on a lot together. For instance, starting every project out with a discovery engagement, offering to do that project on a fixed bid basis, offering, ongoing maintenance packages, and sort of the way we structure all that, if you're just kind of looking for a body to fill a seat, you don't need any of that. Like, none of that makes any sense. But if you're looking at it like, look, I think if I spend $10 million to open a new plant, right? And I can, spend $1 million of that on software to make it run better, that, that's your budget, that's your number. And you need to find somebody that can come in and make sure that happens. Right.
Yeah.
And, and like I said, again, due to the nature of our business, if you try to do it yourself, sometimes it can be very hard to control that budget.
So as you mentioned, Sam, we've done some work together. You came to our coaching program, several years back. Take us through a little bit about like what was going on, because your business was already doing well, right? You had accomplished, like, so you had some great clients that you were working with. You built up a team, right? You had some different salespeople. So a lot of good stuff was happening. What was going on in your business that made you decide to reach out and have a conversation, kind of ultimately come into our program here? What was just on your mind? Because I'm interested, because I think it's important for others to be able to see and maybe find some points of relevance or things where they might be feeling like they're hitting up against some ceilings or challenges. So what was kind of going on for you at that time?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
I think it was very much related to what we were talking about earlier about sales and salespeople and such. It's sort of when I had maybe 2 or 3 different salespeople work for me with mixed results, and then thought, okay, I think maybe I'm the only one that really knows how to sell this right now, and I don't know how to necessarily teach someone to sell it. So, okay, so I'm going to have to do the sales part, let's say. So then what else is in the mix? What's the other part of the equation? And that's the marketing, right? And of course, in my field, if you go talk to most firms, that sales and marketing is the same thing. Like, there is no difference at all. But marketing is much, much, much bigger than that, right? And I had, I believe, worked with 1 or 2 other coaches or advisors or more marketing consultants, folks who would run a pay-per-click campaign for me or create a piece of direct mail. But they still weren't really getting it. So it was more like, okay, even this, I think I probably have to be the one that actually creates it, but I need a guide or someone to tell me you're doing it wrong, right? And it's funny because I think you and I have talked about this before. I think somewhere I landed on like a PDF or lead magnet you had, and I subscribed. And then 2 years later, I went, I probably had hundreds of emails from you. And then 2 years later, something came in my inbox that led me to call you, and so I think at the time it was like, what I need, help with is sort of, a virtual sort of CMO, a virtual, marketing executive type that really knows his stuff. That, it was a fit for me because the size we were. And that way I can do the sales. I can make sure I'm doing the right thing with marketing. And I think great thing you said that, sort of made it clear for me is you said, the same way that you can look at source code and software and see whether it's good or bad, I can look at marketing and tell you whether it's good or bad. Right. And that's definitely been the case, and that's a goal of mine is to figure out, to be able to look at something the way you do and say, oh, that won't work.
Right. Yeah. And I think, one of the other things I remember that, we worked on, which I'd love to hear your view on how it's impacted your business, but really around developing a discovery offering, right? So kind of an early stage, first step, low level of risk, option for people who are interested in working with you. Take us through, what did that look like? Why did you want to put a discovery offer in place for your business? What were the challenges you were facing before putting that in place?
Yes, I think for me, the problem is that, people would reach out to me all the time wanting us to come in and talk to them. And we'd, I might be in there myself or take some of my developers in there and be spending an inordinate amount of time, creating documents and plans and designs and everything, all towards the ability to sort of say, okay, here's the project. And of course, and this was years ago, really, this is early days, but it's, we don't have anywhere near that much money. I only have $10,000. And here I just pitched them on 80 grand or something, or 800 grand, whatever. And so first off, it was like a spending thing. Cause if I say, look, we need to do a $5,000 discovery engagement, and you say, oh, that's way too expensive, then I'm like, you're not my customer. Right. Because it's just not going to work. But I think I think it was also a little bit of like sort of an initial purchase, like get that initial commitment and prove, can this person write a check? And do they have that ability? Because I had people that would say, oh yeah, no problem. You tell me a couple $100 grand, I can do it. They take it to their boss, and their boss says, no way, I'm not trusting you with this. You're a junior level guy. Right. Yeah. They thought they could do it and they were wrong. So a big piece of it is just simply like a money and a budget sort of validation thing. But then it's also just like, we're providing a lot of value through these discovery things, because we're telling you, is what you're even talking about feasible? Is it possible? Are you crazy? Is it going to take 10 times what you're thinking, or is it going to be 10 times cheaper than you think?
Right.
And, what's the value of that? There has to be a price on that.
It's also a real point of differentiation too, though, right? Like you could, like many other consultants out there, just say, sure, we'll happy to do this $50,000 or $150,000 or $500,000 engagement. No problem. We can take care of that. Right. But what you're saying is like, slow down, right? Let's first just like dig into this together and see, as you mentioned, whether it works, whether this makes sense to do. And if it does, then is it going to cost more than you might think? Is it going to cost less? How do we accomplish it? Like really helping them to receive value before even beginning. And then when they do decide to start, doing it in a way that has the highest likelihood of not only them succeeding, but also getting a really positive ROI.
Yeah, exactly. And it builds trust. I always tell people like, do you want to walk into a client and say, here's a proposal for $500,000, pay me? Or, hey, let's just try to do a little tiny thing together and see if we like each other. And that's only going to cost $2,000, And what
percentage of your projects right now begin with a discovery offer?
100%. We will not do a project unless a discovery, because and it's probably been that way for about a year. I think I had a transition point where we did a little bit here and there. Some people could talk us out of it. But, I think what I've noticed and what I've learned is that we just simply do not win those opportunities. Like if someone, again, won't, shell out a small investment and we've done them for $500. If they're just like, look, I just don't really, I can't. Okay, well, can you do like, what about just an afternoon together? It can be a very small amount of money sometimes, but most time it's not that. Most time it's, 2,500, 5,000, something like that. We do that 100% of the time. Now we used to, as we evolved through the process, and like I remember talking with your cousin Sam about this a lot, and he kind of gave me this idea is, you could say, well, say it's 5,000, but if you hire us for the rest of the project, then we'll discount that 50% and discount it back. What I found though is if they do the discovery project, they always do they almost always do the other project, right? Yeah. Whereas if you don't do it, your win rate was much higher there. Whereas if you didn't do the discovery, it was 50-50.
Exactly. It's usually like short-sightedness that holds people back, right? They look at it and go, why would I charge 5,000 when I can charge 50,000? The chances of actually winning the 5,000 are significantly higher than landing the 50,000. And if you land the 5,000, the chances are you're going to also land the 50,000 or turn it into 150,000. So you really don't lose anything by starting with a discovery offer.
Yeah, well, exactly. And we have a project we've been working on that I think it was a $1,200 discovery offer and it was easy peasy. They said, yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it. I think we've done $500,000 with them now. But the thing is they never would have done that
Right.
without that first experience. And I think the other thing is that just that whole process, again, building the trust together, and I tell folks, look, we're delivering real value. We're giving you design documents, requirement documents, a roadmap, feasibility study. I mean, these are real things that, there's people out there that probably charge tons of money for that. But you know what? Take it and hire some development team in China if that's what you want to do. No one's ever done that. Never had anybody. So
a real buyer is not going to do that because number one, you've already given them great value. And number two, usually a buyer is a buyer, meaning that if someone buys, right, like the threshold between a $0 transaction and even a $10 transaction, right, is that they actually take their checkbook out or their credit card out. And so they have to take that step. And when they do that, it means that they're buyers and that they're more likely to buy again. So they recognize their time is too valuable. They don't want to go and start from scratch and try and find somebody else. So as long as you've delivered value and they're feeling good about the relationship and the trust and the results they can see, then they're going to continue on with you, which is what you found. So Sam, I want to talk about you as a CEO, you as a leader. You have a team, you've worked with team members for many years now. What's it like for you? I mean, you have the responsibility to provide for your team, and business, is filled with challenges. It's not always just year after year growth and with no down times or no slow times. There's, even with companies that are growing consistently, there's still lots of challenges that they face. What's it been like, for you as a leader that feels the responsibility to provide for your team?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that definitely is a pressure. I think you can't, you got to worry about the things you can control, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's been a roller coaster, maybe, and I'm very fortunate to have sort of folks that will stick by me and stand by me. And, maybe sometimes they get nervous, but I always kind of come through, I think is what they sort of feel, and we talk about that because I think, one of my big sort of core values, is sort of egalitarianism, that we're all like, I'm not their boss. I don't own them. Right. Like we're partners in this effort, and we're peers. Now, maybe they're, on the field and I'm the coach, but so we talk about these things and, I think that makes it easier for them when there's transparency about what's happening, what's coming up, what's not coming up. Like, oh, things are getting a little slow. We need to finish this up and find something pretty quick.
And what do you do? What do you do when you hit that place? Because I think a lot of people have that where they're either hesitating to bring someone on because they're waiting for the perfect time, or even if they have people, right, they get to a place where maybe revenue does slow down a little bit. They start questioning their team and what they've built and the model. You've been there, right? I mean, we've had conversations, like everyone's been there at different times. What have you found as kind of the best practice, or what helps you the most when business gets to a place where you just have, even if it's just a challenging day, but you also now have to provide for your team members, there's responsibilities. What do you focus on? What do you think about that you found kind of helps you to get through and see the future a little bit so that you don't end up slowing down or taking apart, what you've already built?
So I think one is sort of motivational. One answer is motivational and the other is sort of practical. One is, probably when the business was about 2 years old, there was a time, because I started out just working on my own one-man company, right? Like most people. And there was a time, I think it was like April, where contracts ran out. I had nothing to do. And I sat there for 60 days with nothing to do. And it was funny. I was sitting in this client's office and they're like, doing anything? Like, no one's paying me. I'm just sitting here. Yeah. And of course, very stressful, right? And I think maybe some people would quit 7 days in. But at the end of that 60 days, I had a meeting and we closed a $600,000 project, which later became over $1 million project. So what if I'd given up 2 weeks in and thought, oh, time to go get a full-time job? So I think about that you never know what's around the other corner, just when it's, sort of most bleak. And then I think the other thing is like, if you're like, oh boy, I need to hit a revenue goal, or I need to, we don't have much runway here. Get out a piece of paper and write down, what you can close right now. Like what can you make happen in the short term? Because there's always things hanging out there. There's that guy you talked to 6 months ago, and those things get buried in your CRM. There's a lot of CRM noise, but I think really making those numbers visible, and then also, in conjunction, like trying to set realistic revenue goals, put them somewhere you'll see them. I mean, this is something you told me long time ago, like, put a Post-it note on your bathroom mirror that says, your quarterly goal, right? For me, the home image of my iPhone is a list of my quarterly dollar goals, right? So I look at it constantly,
Yeah.
And, it's like that makes you very aware if you're like, oh man, I'm only 10% of the way there and the quarter's halfway done. That kind of stuff can become invisible sometimes when you're, working on the business otherwise.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, if you don't have a clear sight, or you don't have a visual on what you want to achieve or what that destination is, it's very hard to reach it. I mean, you might end up there, but you might also end up on the other side of the world, right? So it's important to be aiming at least for that target. Sam, there's so much more that we could dig into here, but time-wise, I'm looking at the time here and we're going to have to wrap up. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your work, because one thing that you've done that I want to actually draw people's attention to, which we weren't able to touch on, but I think people could go and check this out for themselves, is that you've done a really good job of building some short, concise case studies, which a lot of people don't do. And I know that's something that we talked about several years ago. And I think it's a big opportunity for people to communicate more of their wins, more of the experiences and the results that they help their clients to achieve. And you've done a very good job of that in your case study section on your website. So just tell everyone here, where's the best place to go to see that and to get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. So our website is unstoppablesoftware.com. And at the top, you'll see a link there to case studies if you want to check those out. I also have a podcast you can check out on the website as well, or by going to unstoppabletalk.com. And you can also just reach me at schutte, that's SSCHUTTE, at unstoppablesoftware.com.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have all that linked up in the show notes with a full transcript. Sam, thanks for coming on and really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michael. It's good to talk to you and talk about all the things we've been working on.
Sounds good.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.